sex can be a pain reliever. Oh, it's a good pain reliever. Whether you are by yourself or playing touchy-feely with somebody else or, full on going at it, like it can be a great pain reliever.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have to be careful and work within the limitations that your body has or that your partner's body has,
Right.
or even, that your mental state allows, depending
Right.
on what you've got going on. I've got PTSD, and so there are some times where being intimate is not going to be on my radar.
Right.
And so that's something you have to kind of balance out too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's something that's so not talked about, whether it's actual sex or playing around and having fun, or how we see ourselves, how we interact with other people.
Hey there, and Happy New Year. Welcome to In Sickness and in Health, a podcast about chronic illness, disability, medical traumas, and everyday uncomfortable healthcare experiences. My name is Cara Gale. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a medical professional, I'm just a person and a patient who really wants to talk about this stuff more. If you're new to the show, welcome. Nothing said on this show should ever be considered medical advice. If you're experiencing a medical issue, please seek qualified medical help. I know the system sucks, but I do wish you a lot of luck. Each person is different, even within disease groups, so none of my guests should ever be regarded as official representatives or spokespersons for their conditions. Please respect their very personal choices, and unless they ask for it, please don't make suggestions about treatment or lifestyle changes, as will come up again and again and again on this show. Unsolicited medical advice is almost never not annoying. Today's episode is part 2 of my conversation with Kirsten Schultz, my guest from episode 10. We talk about how and why Kirsten started the Twitter hashtag chronic sex. Starting this Thursday, she will be hosting regular weekly Twitter chats as a safe space to talk more openly about self-care, self-love, sexuality, and intimacy in the context of chronic illness. You can follow along and/or participate on Thursday evenings starting at 7 p.m. Eastern on Twitter using the hashtag chronic sex. You can find Kirsten on Twitter at Kirsty Schultz and find her blog at notstandingstillsdisease.com. During our conversation in today's episode, we also talk about our own experiences with these topics and touch on physical therapy and more patient advocacy. Given many people's New Year's resolutions have to do with their physical body, I think this is a great conversation to start the year off with. Most of what we're discussing in this episode is sexuality and intimacy, and we touch on gender only in passing. I know that some people don't realize there's actually a difference between these things. This is stuff most doctors and medical practitioners don't even know, and that lack of knowledge and understanding can be very traumatizing for people seeking care. As Dr. Jill said in episode 11, when you're in need of care, that's not a time that you should have to shore up your empowerment or have to educate others on your body. There are very few resources for medical professionals to learn more about this, so I'm hoping to cover gender issues a lot more on the podcast in the future. As always, I'll include links in the show notes to learn more, but I'll try and explain a little bit about this now. The term binary originates from mathematics and computing, but put simply means a system with two options. It's often used to describe the dominant social constructs of good or evil, black or white, disability or ability, illness or health, and in the context of today's episode, male or female, straight or gay. Binary systems don't allow for anything in between or beyond the two options presented, and don't accurately reflect the spectrum that so many of these things exist on. When we use the term sex in today's conversation, we're talking about the act of having sex, but sex can also be used to mean biological sex, which refers to a person's anatomy, physical attributes like external sex organs, sex chromosomes, and internal reproductive structures. We typically think about this in the binary of male and female bodies, but intersex conditions occur naturally in all species. Intersex refers to a variety of conditions in which an individual is born with reproductive or sexual anatomy that does not fit the typical understanding of female or male bodies. Historically, and unfortunately to this day, the medical establishment has done a pretty bad job of dealing with this, but there are activists working very hard to change that. Gender identity is an individual's deeply held sense of being male, female, another gender, or no gender at all. For trans and gender expansive individuals, their gender identity does not always align with the physical characteristics they were born with and the gender assigned to them as a result. For some, that is clear from an early age, while others don't know why their assigned gender doesn't feel right to them until much later in life. We refer to those who have the privilege of biology and gender identities that match as cisgendered, cis meaning on the side of in Latin. While this is the dominant experience for our culture, it should not be viewed as the default because it winds up leaving large groups of people out. Gender expression is the way that we show our gender to the world around us. And because of societal norms and stigma, people don't always express their gender identity in the way that they would prefer. This is why a trans woman may feel that she needs to continue to live her life in public as a man, or vice versa. This is why some people might choose to dress in a gender-normative way in circumstances such as work or family gatherings to avoid judgment, being ostracized, or rude comments from those who don't understand. On the other hand, sexual orientation is about our physical, emotional, and/or romantic attractions to others. People may identify as straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual, queer, pansexual, asexual. The list continues to grow. I know this can all be very confusing, but allowing people to express their gender and sexualities in ways that feel natural to them is vital to a person's sense of self. Gender and sexuality are dynamic, and it seems like our culture is only just now starting to understand that and beginning to embrace spectrum models in relation to both. Many people feel very strongly that they belong on one end of the binary or the other, but for the rest of us, it's a great big wide world, and I'm excited to watch it grow. In last week's episode, I mentioned that I was going to put out a year-end list of favorite podcast episodes from 2015 that relate to some of the stuff we talked about so far on In Sickness and in Health, and as it turns out, I am a liar. I'm still getting used to a new medication and it feels like my brain is full of rocks, so I haven't been doing much of any writing or thinking for that matter. I may still put one out, but if you're interested in getting podcast recommendations from me, you can subscribe to our mailing list from insicknesspod.com. I'll be including recommended episodes with each week's email. The mailing list is just one way to keep up with the show, but you can also follow us on Twitter and on Tumblr and Instagram at InSicknessPod. You can like us on Facebook, as well as subscribe to us on your podcatcher of choice. I hope 2016 will be a great year for In Sickness and in Health, now that I mostly know what I'm doing. If you have any feedback or suggestions of topics to cover or people I should talk to, I would love to hear from you. You can reach me at insicknesspod@gmail.com, and I promise I will answer your email eventually. There is so much that I want to do that would be much easier if I had a staff or at least a research intern or a booker, but I am doing what I can with what I have. I want to talk to more different kinds of people with different experiences, do more topical series, maybe even finally get my shit together and get some music for the podcast, make the podcast more interactive, make the podcast more accessible, and be better about coordinating transcriptions of the episodes. And I am most excited to cover more disability history and more of the science behind some of what we deal with. I have so many things that I want to do with the show, so I'm just hoping I have the spoons to pursue it all. I get really excited just thinking about it, but then I need to take a nap. Please rate and review us on iTunes if you haven't already. It helps other people find the show, which helps me keep the episodes coming. And I hope you enjoyed this episode.
Yeah, I just am coming off of having to do PT, physical therapy pretty intensely twice a week for the last couple weeks. And
which is exhausting.
Oh my gosh, right? Like,
yeah.
I have been sleeping like a baby.
Yeah. I actually had to quit physical therapy because I couldn't, get home afterwards. I would just be so exhausted. And, it's like a 15-20 minute drive from my house, which isn't very far, but it's across the Hudson River, so I have to go across a big bridge, and it's, traffic and, stuff like that. And I just, was getting to the point where it was a danger to my health to continue to go to physical therapy, which is unfortunate, because with EDS, you can't just go see any physical therapist. A lot of what PTs will actually make us worse. And so I found somebody who had worked with EDS patients before and was really open to learning more. And she was awesome. And, she created a whole home program for me that I, of course, didn't actually do.
Yes.
And now I'm back to my weird floppy body. But
oh, I hate that.
yeah,
I hate that so much.
yeah, I'm really mad at myself.
I've been in PT several times, and this is the first time where it's really stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
Like the last time I did PT, they had me do water therapy,
Ooh.
which can be really great for us because, the water removes a lot of pressure placed on your body
Right.
from your weight and, helps your joints move in a much more smooth and consistent manner.
Mm-hmm.
But I was finding myself very much in the same predicament that you were just describing. The job I was working at the time, I had Fridays off, so I would go Friday morning and go do my water therapy. And then I would come home and I would just sleep for the rest of the afternoon. There was no way I could do anything else.
Yeah.
And I was wiped out the rest of the weekend because that was usually like methotrexate night or,
Mm-hmm.
Whatever other medication I was taking night. So, it was kind of a crappy start to a weekend. And now, thankfully I found a medication that's working to control my Still's disease. So I've got a lot more energy, which is just weird. But and my
don't
body's
know what to do with
functioning.
yourself.
No, like the first couple weeks that I was on this medication, like I couldn't sleep because I was just so wired. So I slept on the couch instead of here in my bedroom with my husband for like it wouldn't be every night, but it was, 3 nights this week, 4 nights that week.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just stay up and watch something or play a video game because I couldn't sleep. Now that I am doing my PT and I'm coming off of that and really getting into this home program, it's really helping me sleep because, I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
And the nice thing is, like, the PT I was seeing, she's an integrated physical therapist, so she's very focused on your whole body and, like, let's pinpoint what's not working in your whole body and let's work on it instead of just, well, let's look at your shoulder.
Right.
And the nice thing about her, too, is she's on the local arthritis foundation board, and so she's she's very in tune with what people with rheumatic conditions need and what at what point we need to stop. So, her theory is always no pain. Like, don't push yourself to the point it hurts. Do one less than you think,
Which is the opposite of what a lot of physical therapists will do. Like, our approach was, okay, I'm always going to have pain, but if the pain starts to get worse, that's when we stop. And a lot of physical therapists will push you to, play through the pain or whatever it is because the pain means you're healing or whatever. And for certain conditions, that's actually extremely destructive.
Yeah, like the whole no pain, no gain thing just drives me bonkers.
Yeah.
Like, especially now, again, like where my disease is controlled and I'm really being able to focus on my body, like how do you push through all that pain on a normal basis? Like, how am I alive right now? But also, like, how did I go through physical therapy before? It was like, nope, you have to keep going. I know it hurts, but you got to do 10. Like, there's no way. And I think that turns a lot of people with chronic conditions off.
For sure. And I hear that all of the time in the EDS community, because they just go see whoever physical therapist and then they actually get injured or they, are pushed to a point with their fatigue that they actually wind up setting themselves back, several months. And it, a lot of people for that reason then do not want to try physical therapy again, even as in a situation that they would likely benefit from it in the hands of somebody who knows what they're doing. And that's really unfortunate because we don't have a lot of options for treatment. So if you get kind of turned off of that early, then that can be a real bummer.
Mm-hmm. Especially like with so many of these conditions where motion is really good for you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for me, the whole reason that I've gotten into the home program that we set up was because there were 1 or 2 days where I couldn't do it. I was just exhausted, and it was kind of a mild flare, to be honest. And I slept for like 2 days on the couch. And by the time I went back to physical therapy, like 3 days after that, I could barely move. Like, I wasn't moving enough to get the lubrication in my joints, to get my muscles to where they were getting enough blood, like whatever. And I really felt it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really the first time where I went, oh, okay, so I'm going to have to stick with this every day for the rest of my life if I don't want to turn into the Tin Man.
Yeah.
And like, I will make my peace with that for right now. It does not mean I'm going to stick with it forever. But for right now, as it gets freaking cold here in Wisconsin, I will deal with it. But, before I got my referral to this physical therapist, I was just convinced, especially based on, doing the water therapy that I had done, that there was no way physical therapy was going to be able to help me. And the only reason I went was I started seeing a new rheumatologist at the beginning of this year, specifically so I could get on the medication that I'm on, but also because she's great. And she's also on the local Arthritis Foundation board.
Oh, nice.
Oh, God, I love her. And, so she was like, I think you should go see Dee. I really think you should. She's great. She'll work really nicely with you. And that was the only reason I went. Like, if I had been seeing my past practitioner, even if they had referred me to the same person, I would have been like, yeah. Remember how that worked out like a year and a half ago? So it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's an interesting balance.
It is. It's really, especially when fatigue plays such a huge role in it. Because that's the most disabling thing for me is that, like, and we've tried everything to try and address that issue, and it gets in the way of so much, including what we intended to talk about, which is, sex and sexuality. This is a nice segue. Because it's just, I barely have energy to feed myself or, meet my most basic of needs. How am I supposed to have energy to do physical things like physical therapy or, sexy time or whatever the case may be?
Yeah, it's a very common thing that I've heard as I've kind of started looking more into how those of us with chronic illness see sexuality. This chronic sex idea that I have is focused not only on sex, but also on how we interact with our partner, on how we interact with ourselves.
Yeah. Which is like the most basic building block of sexuality, I think.
Exactly. I think a lot of us, at least from what I've seen, there's a lot of downplaying of our illnesses by people around us. There's a lot of
downplaying it to ourselves, even.
Exactly. It's ableism, really.
Oh, for sure.
And then we internalize it. And so instead of it just being, well, I don't know how you're going to get to physical therapy every day, it's, well, God, you're right. I don't know how I'm going to get to physical therapy and what's it going to do for me. It's not going to do anything for me, and I'm wasting my time, and I could be doing something productive with my time, or like, I don't know, sleeping, and why am I doing this? And so that ableism becomes internalized, and then we put ourselves down. And when we do that, not only does it eat away at our self-esteem, it removes our ability to treat ourselves with love, kindness, and care. And so anything that we would do nice for ourselves either becomes non-existent or goes overboard into a very negative place. So, you might treat yourself with, I don't know, a nice piece of chocolate cake one day.
I don't see anything wrong with that.
I don't either. But when you've made a cake and then you eat the whole cake,
okay, that might be a problem.
In a day,
yeah,
like I did like 2 weeks ago, then that's a problem.
Yeah.
And, then it becomes a thing where we really need to check in with ourselves about how we're feeling about ourselves. And that day, it happened to be my my arthritis anniversary. And I went, okay, I will give myself a pass today because it's a crappy day.
Mm-hmm.
But next time we're not going to eat a whole cake. You know? Um,
Just half of a cake.
yeah, I mean, half a cake is great. Go for it. It was like an 8 by 8. It's not
Oh,
like a
wow.
whole sheet
Okay.
cake,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
still, whole cake. At least I know I make good chocolate cake.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it really, um, the more we downplay how great we are, the more that impacts our relationships with not only with ourselves but with other people.
Absolutely.
And then that impacts obviously how we see ourselves as sexy.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think sexy is just, you know, Victoria's Secret angels walking with these big gaudy wings that 8 turkeys probably died to make, like, you know, and they haven't eaten in like 3
Yeah.
days so they can walk.
It's just, that's such a specific and narrow idea of what sexy is, you know, and it's such a shame that kind of mainstream culture really limits sexy, at least for, you know, mainstream straight cisgendered women. That's what sexy is. And like, what a shame, because there's so many other different kinds of sexy out there.
Oh, for sure. For sure. And it's sad. I think it's sad too. And, you know, if we go back to that idea of internalized ableism, okay, so I am never in a million years going to look like one of those runway models.
Right.
Probably never going to be able to balance those like 30-pound wings
Nope.
on my angry neck.
I cannot wear high heels. I'm definitely not going to be walking around in lingerie in front of millions of people. That's not going to happen.
No. I'll do that at home.
Sure.
Oh, I will do that at home.
Sure.
Sweet, but no. And I mean, there's this idea that we all have to look a certain way, that we all have to act a certain way. And it's interesting. I think we talk about it a lot, about how it affects women, which is very, you know, a very important subject, especially as it can, you know, be the cause for a lot of women developing eating disorders.
Right. Or if not the cause, a contributing factor for sure.
And it's not talked about that much how it affects men.
Or you know, trans people or non-binary people or agendered people. Like, that doesn't even, like, we definitely don't talk about how it affects men, and we for sure don't talk about how it affects people that don't fit in that, you know, traditional binary.
Oh, exactly. It's not even on the radar for anybody, really, you know. And I think we really have to be real about sexuality in general too. Like, you're not just one thing or another thing. Like, there's this whole spectrum. And
really, why limit yourself?
Exactly. I mean, right. And it doesn't matter. You know, we all change throughout our lives and throughout specific moments in our lives with many things. Like, we might like a certain soup as we're growing up, and then we get in our teens and we're like, this soup is disgusting.
I feel that way about Campbell's tomato soup. I loved it. It was my favorite thing in the world growing up, and now I won't eat soup from a can. I've become a soup snob. I demand fresh soup.
That was exactly what I was thinking about, actually. Yeah. I loved tomato soup when I was little. Oh, man. And then, like, I turned, like, 8, and I was like, oh, this is nasty. Like, get away. But I'll eat a nice tomato bisque.
Oh, of course. Delicious.
No problem. But, so, yeah, chronic sex and soup.
Same thing.
Pretty much. Do you like bacon bits in your soup?
Do you like it cream based or what other stock based?
Do you like to dip it in bread, or do you like a bread bowl?
So many choices.
So many. See, and sexuality is just like soup. You can do so many things with it.
It's true.
Right?
You can get it from a can. You can make it from scratch.
You can buy it from a store. You can. But yeah, and it's just interesting how we don't address as a society what the notions of sexuality that are fed to us really do to us. I mean, if you ask any single person, they'll probably tell you either that the ideas of sexuality regarding any gender are, BS, or they'll tell you, oh yeah, no, women are supposed to, walk around in lingerie, or men are supposed to have six-pack abs, or, any number of things. And it's very detrimental to our mental health and to our emotional health, and ultimately to our physical health.
To our physical health, absolutely. Yeah.
Because sex is so, I mean, I'll just say sex is awesome.
Yeah.
If you are in the mood for sex, sex is awesome.
Right. If everyone involved is consenting adults and everyone is cool with what's going on, it is the greatest.
Exactly. But sometimes sex might be not your thing, or you might not be into it, and that's fine too. And I think, those are things that we have to address, especially in the chronic illness community.
Yeah.
Sex can be a pain reliever. Oh, it's a good pain reliever. Whether you are by yourself or playing touchy-feely with somebody else, or, full on going at it, like, it can be a great pain reliever. But you also have to be careful and work within the limitations that your body has, or that your partner's body has.
Right.
Or even, that your mental state allows, depending on what you've got going on. I've got PTSD, and so there are some times where being intimate is not going to be on my radar.
Right.
Or where suddenly it's just very much not going to be on my radar. And so that's something you have to kind of balance out too. And I think it's something that's so not talked about. Whether it's actual sex, or playing around and having fun, or again, how we see ourselves, how we interact with other people. And I mean, I could go really philosophical on this and talk about how, all these beauty companies make kajillions of dollars off of us, and so that's part of why.
Right. And now they're making kajillions of dollars off of the Dove Real Beauty campaign, which I find hilarious. It's such nice thought, but terrible execution. And so
where's the girl in the wheelchair?
Yeah, and so many allegedly body positive campaigns completely leave out people with disabilities, and that's ridiculous because we have bodies too. And
wait, this is a body I'm
in? Yeah.
Whoa.
I know, right? We have bodies, we have needs, and just because you're disabled doesn't mean that you don't want or need sex. And sure, I don't want to say that everyone wants or needs sex, because that's not true. Asexual people absolutely do exist, and there's nothing wrong with them because they're asexual. But, there's also plenty of other people who aren't asexual and do have sexual needs. And just because they have physical issues doesn't mean that those automatically kind of dissipate or disappear.
Exactly. And I think too, like we were kind of just talking about, there are different ways of getting some sort of sexual satisfaction or gratification. I have seen news stories talking about people who are paraplegic, but that have sensation in maybe their toe. And so that being a very sensual thing for them, for somebody to play with and do fun things with. But it's still something that's sexy for somebody, and it's something we need to talk about.
Yeah.
In the chronic illness community, but in society at large, everybody's so different, and we all have different needs and wants and fears and goals, and I think there's just this great overgeneralization of what we all want and what we all should be. And I think that's really the root of this is, well, let's get individual. Let's talk about, why Jenny isn't having a good time with her husband, or why Dean is having a hard time being intimate with his wife, or, let's talk about it and let's address it. And
Right.
let's think about what we can do to help other people in similar situations.
Right. Instead of just pretending it doesn't exist or that it's a given that, after you've been together for a while, you're just going to stop having sex and maybe one or both of the partners will start having sex with other people and, not talk to each other about the fact that they're not having sex and that sort of thing. Actually, last week's episode of the Death, Sex, and Money podcast hosted by Anna Sale from WNYC, which is a great show all around. But they actually did an episode on people, like they had people call in and talk about like why they're not having sex. And that was actually really fascinating because even just within the sphere of not having sex, there were so many individual stories and so many individualized reasons that was happening or not happening in their case for them. And it's just, it's a lot of times there's like this assumption that like if you're not having sex, there's something wrong with you, or you're like weird and religious, or like there's all of these weird assumptions that come with this stuff, and rarely are those things ever actually true.
I've been talking with somebody that I care about very much about dealing with realizing that this person is asexual. And them worrying about how it's affecting their partner, or that it means that there's something wrong with them, and that they're not a good person because they're not satisfying their partner, or they're not doing what society is telling them they should do. And I think there have been a lot of movements lately to raise more awareness about various sexual identities and sexual orientations, and that's really helped this person. To be able to show them like, hey, this is what I think might be going on with you, and
right, like this is actually a thing. It's not right. There's nothing wrong with you. This is a real thing that like other people experience, and it's not, there's nothing wrong with you.
Exactly. And sexual compatibility can be a make or break thing for some people. And, luckily this person isn't in that situation. But it's, for some people that can be a really difficult thing.
Right.
It's something that I think should be addressed early on in any relationship. Because let's be real, those of us who are interested in sex probably are going to have sex at some point in our relationship.
Right.
And we should probably address it.
Yeah. And that also might change over the course of the relationship. So, like, even if you do address it early on, it might be a good idea to revisit it, several years down the line or whatever the case may be. A lot of people have a hard time kind of getting back into the groove after they've had children. And another plug for another WNYC podcast, The Longest Shortest Time, they did an episode called The Parent's Guide to Doing It. There's 2 episodes. The second one, the most recent one, was a live episode that they did with a sex educator and an OBGYN. And they talked about, getting back into the sack, basically, after having kids and then not having sex for a long time. And I think that actually would be a helpful conversation to listen to for people that maybe are just coming out of a flare, or maybe were feeling really terrible for a long time but are starting to feel a little bit better and want to get back in touch with their bodies. Because I think that that's something that is also not really talked about. That, sometimes you can be very sexual and sometimes you can be not sexual at all, and you're still the same person,
For sure. I think it could be hard too, like you just mentioned, coming out of a flare. For the last 7 years or so, maybe 6 or 7, I have been in a very heightened disease activity time period. And in that time period, I've been diagnosed with way too many things to list off. But, it can be hard, one, for people with multiple chronic illnesses. Like, so I have my Still's disease and I have my fibromyalgia, and maybe my Still's disease is doing great. And I'm like, yeah, my knees can handle like certain positions. Yes. And then my fibromyalgia speaks up and says, hi, no, nobody can
Please
touch
don't
you.
touch me anywhere. Please just don't touch me. Yeah. I'm very
Exactly.
familiar with that feeling.
Oh, allodynia is not my favorite.
No.
And so that can be hard too.
Yeah.
But then also, if you're in a long-term relationship, like I am with my husband, we've known each other for what seems like forever. Sometimes it's really difficult when you go from that lover on equal
Mm-hmm.
plane idea to that caregiver,
Yeah, well,
care
that's a
needer.
huge thing. I mean, that's a interesting kind of power dynamic there, and
Mm-hmm.
also, being the caregiver or the caregivee. I don't know what the term
I
is
don't
there.
know.
That can really change how you see your partner on either end of it,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of removes the sexuality from that person and also from yourself. This is something that I personally have been really struggling with, that like I don't, after being very sick for the last couple years, I don't feel like a sexual being anymore, and I don't know if my partner still views me that way. And since since we haven't talked about it, so this is all do as I say, not as I do,
Mm-hmm.
because this is something that I personally struggle with too.
No,
But
I feel you.
yeah,
I'm in a very similar boat. I mean, a little bit different. Like, now that I'm coming out of being in this heightened disease activity state and kind of rebuilding basically my whole life,
yeah,
right?
oh, absolutely, yeah,
Um, I'm finding where I felt like there had been a little bit of a power dynamic shift to like caregiver, caregivee, right? Which my husband and I kind of flip-flop between because he has some issues with depression too, and
yeah.
so,
And my partner
it's
also has a chronic illness, so that does totally add in a whole other dynamic of like,
it
oh, well, we
does.
both have problems, and
We're both having a crappy day. Let's order pizza.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
so I'm finding myself coming out of that, kind of perpetual need to weave in and out of the caregivee state.
mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, okay, what's our relationship like now? I mean, like,
Right,
it's great, but what's the power dynamic? Like, are we equal now? Am I going to be more caregiver and you're going to be more caregivee? Like, and trying to navigate that can, when it flip-flops so much, that can play a really big role in our sexuality. And especially
right,
like I said, if you're both having a bad day and you guys just want to eat pizza, like clothed or not clothed, whatever, like
yeah. I mean,
maybe that's your thing.
for my partner and I, like our good days almost never line up. Like
Oh yeah.
if I'm having a good day, he's doubled over with abdominal pain. If he's having a good day, I can't move because I'm so tired and in pain. And then on top of that, there's also, medication side effects of like low
Hmm.
libido, and then like the body image issues. For him, he's lost a ton of weight. I've gained a ton of weight. Like what, I don't even know my body anymore.
Hmm.
I don't even know.
Hmm.
I feel very out of touch with my own body.
Yeah. This is I think this chronic sex movement will be a really good thing because I mean, so like for me, most of what I do, most of what I write about comes out of very personal experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've written about my sex life before on my blog. My father-in-law reads my blog, so
Yes.
at first I was like a little like, maybe I don't want my father-in-law to read this. And then I kind of got to this point, like my father-in-law has Crohn's disease.
Mm-hmm.
Like my father-in-law were both on Humira at the same time, like talking turkey about, giving shots and so it's interesting because as much as like for me there's that personal disconnect of like, okay, I do not want you to know about my sex life with
Yeah.
your son. There's also like, well, I mean, I don't want to think about it, but maybe it'll help you and your wife.
Yeah.
Or maybe it'll help somebody or like that's kind of where all my stuff comes from is
Right.
yeah, I'll share some really personal kind of gross TMI stuff, but it's like if you don't know that somebody else is going through it, you probably think you're as weird as I do.
Exactly. Absolutely. And my general rule of thumb is like if something is weird and awkward to talk about it and people don't usually talk about it, that means we need to talk about it way more. Like we
Exactly.
need to talk about it so much because no one's talking about it. And that's, that just further reinforces stigma and further reinforces ableism and all of the bad stuff that comes along with this stuff. But if you shine a light on it, kind of open the windows, let it air out a bit.
Exactly. I mean, I like to think about it as like a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Just like we think about a relationship. If one partner's not going to talk about anything at all, and the other partner's not sure if they should bring it up, like, you should bring it up. Like,
Right.
communication is important, whether that's on a big system-wide, society-wide level, or you and your loved one in the bedroom. Like, whether that involves sexy times or not. Like,
Right.
communication is the biggest, like, strong point that everybody needs to have in order to function in the world, I think. And communication can be so many different things. It doesn't just have to be speaking or writing. It can be sign language. Like there's so many different ways you can communicate that this is being ableist. But like, it's communication is the biggest thing. If nobody knows there's a problem,
Right.
nobody can fix the problem.
Yes. Or what the actual issues are, because there might be this conception that it's one way, but it's actually something else entirely.
Exactly.
For instance, somebody might assume that the reason that I am not getting it on very often is because I'm in pain all the time or something like that, but it's actually has way more to do with the fatigue factor and that sort of thing. And so if you're trying to solve one problem that isn't actually the problem, like the pain problem, let's say, but you're not addressing the fatigue problem, which is the bigger problem, then how is that really helpful?
Exactly. Oh my God. Like, I just have to say, fatigue is the worst.
The
Like,
worst.
I can deal with anything. Like, throw abscess, wisdom tooth pain at me. Like, throw
Mm,
whatever else at me you want, but don't give me the fatigue.
yeah.
And I can totally handle it.
Yeah.
But when you put the fatigue in the mix, it kills everything.
Well, I mean, it's the most basic factor necessary for life, basically.
Right.
Like, if like for a while we were kind of looking at like, well, maybe I have like a mitochondrial disorder or dysfunction, and that's still possible, but it's just kind of, there's not enough research there and there's not enough information, especially for adults. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I was trying mitochondrial supplements and learning about that sort of thing. And so if your body and the mitochondria, put simply, in your body are like the powerhouses of your cells. They produce the energy needed for the cells to function. So if they're not working properly, your cells aren't going to function properly. And if your cells aren't functioning properly, like your body is not functioning properly, your life isn't functioning properly. It's learning about that was really interesting because it helped me to understand it on a literally kind of molecular level and understand how integral fatigue or how integral energy is in so many different bodily functions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I always like to think about too, the old scientific idea of that energy can't be destroyed or created. You can just transform it.
Right.
And so one of the ways that I kind of practice self-care and self-love when I'm having very high fatigue, very low energy days, like I used to be somebody who did everything. Like I pushed through everything. I would help everybody. I didn't take naps. Naps were a waste of time. You were not productive during naps. Like I could have been doing a million things during those 2 days I napped like a couple weeks ago.
Which is hilarious because, like, no, but you wouldn't have.
I wouldn't have, but
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's interesting to kind of think about the idea about energy can't be created or destroyed. It's just transformed or used in a different way. Um, you know, for me, if I'm having a low energy day, it helps remind me that my body is working really, really hard for me to be able to breathe, for me to be able to drink water. Like, it's working so hard so that I can at least try to accomplish the most basic of functions. And it really helps, me to treat myself with care and treat myself like I appreciate myself instead of going like, oh my God, you're worthless. You're sitting on the couch all day. So this whole chronic sex idea kind of came out of one of the other conferences that I was at earlier this year, which is the Arthritis Introspective National Gathering. And Arthritis Introspective is actually pairing up with the Arthritis Foundation to kind of be their post, like, juvenile arthritis camp, support. So, once you age out of, like, if you have juvenile arthritis, once you age out of camp, once you kind of turn 18, then Arthritis Introspective would kind of be your main support group. And so their national gathering this year was actually in Milwaukee, which is about an hour and a half away from me. So I drove back and forth each day.
Oh, wow.
Which wasn't the best idea, but it was fine. And they actually had one of the breakout sessions was about sex and intimacy. And they had this great woman come from a very feminist-based sex shop in Milwaukee.
I love those places. They're the best.
It was so great. It's called the Tool Shed, and
nice.
It's fantastic. I know. A bunch of us actually went after the session to the Tool Shed just to go look. And, she talked a lot about how, sometimes doctors don't know some of the things that affect our sexuality, whether it's the fatigue being so bad or different medications.
Or even if they know, they have no idea. They might intellectually know that a medication might cause a lowered libido or that fatigue might get in the way, but they don't really understand what that actually means for the patient.
Exactly. And sometimes they get so focused on treating your condition that they don't think about your quality of life.
Yes.
It's like, I kind of like to have sex, so that's a problem.
Yeah.
And I volunteered a lot with Planned Parenthood when I was in high school and doing very sex positive stuff with them. And that's kind of been a running theme through my life, which is nice. But really going to this session where other people really had so many questions for this amazing woman about, her personal stuff as she had lupus, and talking about what she does for certain things, to talking about sex aids and self-exploration and all that good stuff, actually got me to Riding with Creaky Joints, which is one of the big arthritis websites, about, kind of this idea of self-love and relationships and sex. And so that's kind of where this whole chronic sex chat is coming out of, was this great national gathering that Arthritis Introspective put on. And the focus that we really have to be positive about ourselves in order to be fully engaged in relationships. And there's not, I think there's a little bit of a disparity between how that phrase could be taken in quote unquote normal people life versus our lives, right? So it's quote unquote normal people life, it's well, you can't love anybody until you love yourself. And it's
right.
Our life is no.
It doesn't quite work that way.
Right. The opposite is true for me. It took my husband showing me that I was kind of awesome for me to go, oh, okay, yeah, I am kind of awesome.
Yeah, it's you can't always hold the mirror up yourself. Sometimes you need somebody else to hold it for you.
Right. And I think that's especially true with chronic illness. And sometimes it's not your spouse or your partner, sometimes it's your sister, sometimes it's your best friend,
Right.
it can be anybody, I think.
And it can be a combination of those people too.
Oh, for sure. And sometimes it can just be something random.
Mm.
I don't know if you watched it yet, but the Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. It was an interesting examination of how PTSD or any chronic illness really can affect your life and how you can kind of be strong in spite of that. I hate the word strong because of the negative ableist connotations, but
I get
you
what
can
you
be
understand.
resilient.
Yeah.
Whatever.
The buzzword of the moment.
Yes. And so it can, that realization that you're worthy of love can come from anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
It can come from a Netflix show. It could come from Bob's Burgers. I don't know how, but it probably could.
I love Bob's Burgers also so much. To bring it back around to the sex stuff, you got a chance to go to Stanford's Medicine X conference this year, which sounds super fun. And they actually did a panel on sex and intimacy. Did you have any big takeaways from seeing that panel? I wasn't able to watch the live feed, but I did follow along on Twitter, so I know a little bit about what was talked about there.
Yeah, it was really interesting. The nice thing about the panel is that because it was smaller, because it was during, a breakout session time, there was much more of a dialogue kind of between the panel and the audience.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, the panel was mostly patients. There was a medical student up there, and one of the patients is also a physician. So, it was equally represented, but, everybody kind of brought up, well, we might have a lot of issues with sex and sexuality, but we don't bring them up because it's awkward, and we wish our physicians would bring them up. And Ronnie Ziegler, who co-founded Smart Patients and is amazing, used to work for Google, like all around freaking awesome person. Kind of like, I just want to chime something in. Like sometimes, Ronnie's a very part-time clinician in his own right. Like he will admit very part-time. I think that there are a lot of physicians that don't bring up these things because of whatever's going on in their life.
Right.
And I think that's something that we have to kind of consider. A lot of us really want to have physicians that are very interactive with us, that we connect with on a personal level, that are very into the shared decision-making process and
right.
patient-centered care. But I think that goes two ways.
Yeah. And also they're trained to do the exact opposite.
Exactly.
Of all of those things.
Exactly. It's nice to see, Stanford did a little 2-day conference at the beginning of Medicine X, actually, that was MedX Ed,
Mm-hmm.
that was all focused on medical students and the medical education process.
Which is
and a lot
a disaster.
It was awful. But, a lot of them were able to stick around for the whole thing, and were very receptive to, patient feedback. One of the things that they did during their little conference was they had kind of these design tables. So they had several medical students, and then they'd have a patient, and they had to design a solution for a problem. And then the patient had to be like, well, so that doesn't work in real life because da 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 da. And so the students were very receptive to that and very willing to kind of change things around, which is much different than, say, like the physicians that I work with.
Right.
At my job.
Like the younger generation is definitely a very different kind of physician. I purposefully seek out younger doctors, and which isn't to say that, experience and wisdom gained from a lifetime of clinical work isn't valuable. It very much is, but you know, our medical knowledge as humans doubles something like every 3 years, you know. So old school doctors that have a very old school approach, like I don't have a very old school disease. I have a very not old school body that needs a not old school approach. And so I purposefully seek out younger physicians and, you know, the friends that I have that are currently training to be doctors. And I actually did a 5-day workshop at Columbia in narrative medicine that they had for mostly for medical students, but I kind of elbowed my way in. And that was amazing to be in a room full of people who all really want to make medicine more collaborative and more human based, you know, like human centered, patient centered, all of that is good stuff. And that's something that I think a lot of the younger doctors are more interested in than the old school ones.
Oh, for sure. And I think that there's you know, there's more of a focus for them on treating you as a whole person.
Yeah.
Instead of treating you as your EDS or
right.
as your other diagnoses. Like,
which, I mean, you know, they're all so specialized in their organ systems that when you have something as systemic as EDS or even as systemic as Still's disease, you know, you're not getting, even if they are treating your whole EDS, you're still not, you know, if you're only getting it from one specialty, I'm having a hard time articulating this thought, but does that make sense?
Yeah, it doesn't, it might not help you as much,
right.
just because there is so much that is all encompassing about your illness, right? Yeah. Like for me, when I first started getting actual medical care, in 2010, as an adult with insurance, I had a really hard time interacting with physicians, just because I was like, well, okay, you know, they would ask me how long I'd had this problem, and then I'd be like, oh, 10 years. And they'd be like, what?
Well,
you know?
Yeah, that's awkward.
Or like basically my whole life, why are you here now? Like,
right.
But then you'd also have, well, you know, because of this illness, these things happen.
Right.
So I'm only here because it's extremely exacerbated and I want to pass out. And so then, you know, I have found like you were saying, kind of the older physicians or more old school physicians that I run into just kind of blow me off as being like a little girl who didn't know what I was talking about.
Or that, like, you maybe, you know, if you come in and you have specific knowledge about something and you're saying, like, I'm having this problem, it's consistent, the symptoms are consistent with this thing. A lot of times the assumption is that you spent 10 minutes on WebMD and, like, you're like, I've diagnosed myself with this thing. And you know, it's so frustrating because it's like, okay, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I'm having symptoms consistent with this thing that is sometimes associated with this other thing that I have. And, you know, let's check it out. You know, I haven't necessarily diagnosed myself with it, but I think it's a possibility. And it's just so frustrating to like hit my head against this wall that I've hit so many times in the past.
You know, that actually brings up an interesting conversation that we had at Medicine X. On Thursday, which is the day before the actual conference started, they had a workshop on designing for behavior change, which was led by Dr. Kyra Bobbinet, who is amazing. Yeah, and then the fabulous Britt Johnson, aka Hurt Blogger. So many good things I could say for hours and hours. You know, and so we had this great workshop, and we kind of broke off into groups after learning about how to design for behavior change. And then in our groups, we're supposed to address the main problem that we wanted to address. And my group kind of ended up being a mishmash of things because people didn't quite understand what other people were talking about. And anyway, it got mishmashed. And what we ultimately decided to do was we wanted to see how we could address ending paternalism in physicians. So that idea that you have to listen to the physician, do what he or she says, also kind of known as white coat syndrome. Like, oh, their white coat means they're so smart, you must listen.
Right.
But yeah, so my group is trying to address paternalism in physicians, and we're like, how are we going to convince physicians to change? And then we realized that you can't. You can't get anybody to change. You can provide motivation to change. You can provide
incentives,
monetary fun stuff, kudos, like whatever. But you can't make somebody change. So what we did instead was we designed this great idea where you take people who have been newly diagnosed with an illness. So I will use rheumatoid arthritis just for the sake of being slightly more simple. And I think it's because that's the one I used in the presentation that we had to give at the end. But, so you have a patient that's just been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and they want to learn all they can about their illness. So then, hypothetically, a local university and the local chapter of the Arthritis Foundation put together this great series of talks and series of classes, Saturday mornings, whatever. Maybe it's 2 Saturdays a month, whatever. And that patient goes, and they can just go to the first one and get the very basics about arthritis in general, how it encompasses over 100 different diseases. Maybe learn a little bit more specifically about rheumatoid arthritis, and maybe medicines that can treat these different autoimmune and auto-inflammatory diseases. But let's say they get super interested in it. They keep going to these classes. There's rheumatologists that come talk. There's physical therapists that come talk. And you really get to learn and soak up all of this knowledge about your illness. And at the end, you get this little certificate that says, Kirsten Schultz is now a certified expert in rheumatoid arthritis. And then that patient gets super excited about the idea of helping other people because they got along with the other people in this class really, really well. So then that same university and that same local Arthritis Foundation chapter put together this thing where you learn about leadership and mentoring. And you go to these classes, and at the end of those classes, you get another little certificate that says, Kirsten Schultz has been certified as an awesome leader and mentor. And then you get placed on this international registry that, talks about your illness and any other, concurrent illnesses or comorbidities that go along with your illnesses you might have. So you might see, Sjogren's syndrome or Raynaud's syndrome or, a number of other things this patient has. And it lists, the general area where you live, so city, not super specific, and has, some contact information. So your email address, your phone number, and you've okayed that information being out there. And then any physician across the world that has a patient with that illness. So let's say, switching now, that illness is very specific. Let's say that it's, systemic juvenile idiopathic arthritis, aka Still's disease. And this patient has also been diagnosed with fibromyalgia. And so they're looking for somebody that has knowledge on both. And they don't care where that person is because, hello, we live in the 21st century.
Right.
So then they look and they find my name. And, they shoot me an email or they give me a call. And I kind of walk them through kind of the general challenges of having this illness. Whether it's learning about the medications that are specific to Still's disease, or learning about some of the ways you can cope that aren't necessarily medicinal in purpose, whether it's ice packs or hot packs or meditation or, whatever. And I kind of help guide that person through their process with the hope that wherever they are in the world, they can go through a similar program and help other people. So I guess that's something that's already being looked into.
Well, that's great because, and I say this to people all the time, is that, when you get diagnosed with something, the doctor doesn't then say, And hey, there's a ton of other people out there that have this same thing that you do, or that have similar conditions that might have a lot of the same challenges that you do. Like, they don't tell you that. It's
Oh,
something
no.
that every single person that I've talked to in the course of doing this podcast, you know, they discovered it on their own when they went online and like found, oh my goodness, there's this whole sea of people, you know.
I was actually emailing back and forth the other day with a gal who lives in New York who has had rheumatoid arthritis for 3 or 4 years now, and never got an explanation of what her illness is.
Ugh.
Not anything from her physician.
Not even one of those
Doesn't
crappy
know.
pamphlets.
Nope. Doesn't know
Ugh.
where the local arthritis foundation office is. Doesn't know anyone there who to contact. So, having a standardized handout at the end of
Yeah.
those diagnosis visits, at least, that says, hey, here's the local arthritis foundation. Here's, this person who runs, maybe the juvenile arthritis program. Here's, another patient in the area that would be
Right.
willing to help. Even if it doesn't go to this huge, international database, if we can at least have local
Right.
resource sheets, oh my gosh.
Right, because it's weird, like, reality wise, that a doctor is not going to be able to sit down with you and explain all of the intricacies of your disease, and the likelihood that your doctor even knows the intricacies of your disease is actually pretty slim. And so what we need is a jumping off point. We need to have that at the very least, instead of just like, saying like, okay, you have this thing, I'm going to write you a prescription, good luck with all that.
Exactly.
It's so
So many
unhelpful.
people leave those appointments, they get their prescription for whatever medication and they're like, oh, great, this medicine's going to cure me.
Yeah.
Like, well, honey,
It's a little more complicated than that.
let me get you some
Well,
hot cocoa and a blanket and let's talk about this.
right, because we live in this culture that's so focused on cures and fixing people. And if you're not fixable, you get discarded, you know?
And even, like we're talking about this idea of resource sheet, maybe at the bottom have common hashtags that are used for,
Mm-hmm.
the kinds of diseases you treat in that area. Like if you're a rheumatologist, have all the cool rheumatology related hashtags like hashtag rheum, RHEUM. Spell
Right.
that right, I think.
Yeah.
And then, have the more basic ones like hashtag chronic life
I
or,
mean, the chronic life hashtag is just, which was created by Britt Johnson, aka Hurt Blogger, for me was like transformative. I had already had the idea to do this podcast, but that was like one of the real catalysts where I was like, oh, I can do this. There is a need for this. There is, people need to talk about what their lives are like while they're living with all of this bullshit.
Yeah. Oh my God. And she did a great talk actually at MedX
Mm-hmm.
about the process of creating that hashtag and about kind of what she saw as the end result, up through September at least, and how amazing it was to watch the number of people, one, who were using that hashtag, but the number of people who were using that hashtag concurrently with other hashtags related to their illness.
Right.
So I'll be frank, there are 3 or 4 of us Still's disease patients that love to, use the chronic life and Still's disease hashtag at the same time in our tweets. And Still's disease was towards the top of the different, tags that were used at the same time as the chronic life tags. And I sat there with a shit-eating grin on my face. I was pleased as punch. But I think it goes to show too, whenever you have a movement like chronic life that goes across all these different chronic illness communities,
Mm-hmm.
it also raises awareness of specific conditions.
Right. And you get that cross-pollination between conditions, which I think is so important. Cross-pollination is always a good idea, whether it's, between different conditions in the chronic illness community or with something like the MedX conference where you're getting different disciplines in the same place. Like we need so much more of that all of the time, constantly, to kind of, because if everything's so homogenized and everyone's in their own silos, like that's, you might be working toward very specific goals in those locations, but until you actually, share information and share experience and share knowledge, those very specific goals that you're working towards might be completely like off target,
For sure. And there might be other people that are working on a similar thing
Mm-hmm.
that you guys can help each other. I'm putting together a proposal with somebody that I met at MedX to get grant money for this great project about kind of this idea of having like a LinkedIn for patients.
Ooh.
Like, hey, let's say I'm picking a random university. Not really, because I'm wearing my University of Oregon pants. So let's say the University of Oregon, it's a Civil War game day too. They're playing Oregon State, so I have to be a little biased. So the University of Oregon, let's say, is trying to work on getting patient feedback about this new workflow that they're working on in their rheumatology clinics. Just very specific, right? And they want to seek out patients who have rheumatology knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
but also have some sort of knowledge of behind the scenes things in clinics, like workflows, like the medical assistant takes you to the room and then they check you in and they get your vitals and how all of those things go, because
Mm-hmm.
those are all mapped out on paper.
Right.
So they want somebody who has the knowledge of both, and they can go on this patient LinkedIn and they can search by different tags and find a patient like myself who kind of works both sides of the fence and go, okay, so I see that you have this knowledge. If we compensate you this much for, looking at these things, is that good for you?
Imagine patient compensation. What a concept.
I know. I kind of really hope it goes somewhere. I would love
me as somebody who is not currently working and is a full-time patient, I would also like to see that go somewhere.
Yeah. I'm like slowly realizing, like, kind of going back to the beginning of our conversation, as I'm having to do all these PT exercises, like I have to do them several times a day.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like slowly realizing how like horribly set up work life is in general for people like us who have to do things, like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can't just roll out my yoga mat and bring like my Pilates ball.
You can. You'll get some weird looks. You might get fired, but you could.
I mean,
you could try.
It.
Yeah.
I should probably just get a second Pilates ball and keep it there.
Yeah. Or get one of those like Pilates ball chair things.
Oh, that would be nice.
Yeah.
I'd get too bouncy, I think.
Yeah, I would have to take a nap after like 15 minutes probably.
Oh, yeah. That sounds good. Both the nap and the bouncy chair.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's there have been some other great conferences that I've been to this year too. The Arthritis Foundation has their juvenile arthritis conference, so I went to that this year for the first time as a 27-year-old, but that's okay.
Well, you're still too young to have arthritis, so.
Yes. If I had a penny, not just a nickel, a penny, I think I'd be a millionaire.
Well, you probably wouldn't have any medical debt.
Oh, that is true. Oh, that would be nice.
Yeah.
So went to that, and they had some really great, inspiring people there. They had Todd Peck, who is involved in NASCAR truck racing.
Okay.
Who has juvenile arthritis. He's like 25, 26, something like that. And he can't take any medications due to NASCAR's medication policies.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So, hearing him talk about that and me going, why would you do that still? But if you love something, you find a way. And then Anna Villafañe, who is in Broadway's smash hit new musical On Your Feet about the life of Gloria Estefan and her husband.
I did not realize that was a thing, but now I really want to see it.
You should look it up. They actually opened the Thanksgiving Day Parade yesterday, Macy's parade, and they were on The View today. They've done some other things, but if you look up On Your Feet, it's great.
I'm already on the website.
Oh, well, there you go. Anna has systemic juvenile idiopathic arthritis, just like me. And so that has been really helpful, actually, for me doing my physical therapy and stuff. Because, like, shameless plug, I play my ukulele and sing a little bit. And, I'm not ever going to be a Broadway star, but
right.
I think
it's actually really important, I think, to have models of people like doing things, and it's, that can also, it can be kind of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand you're like, how come they can do the thing and I can't do the thing? But also, to see how people are able to figure out how they can do a thing. I mean, something like Broadway is unbelievably grueling. Their schedules, they do like 2 performances a day, 6 days a week, and it would, I mean, even most fully able-bodied people probably would have a really hard time keeping up with that. But having models of different kind of paths that you can take, I think, is helpful for anyone.
For sure. They also had this great rheumatologist, and I can't remember her name. Starts with a P, I think. But she actually moved to Nevada from Florida after she started practicing both pediatric and adult rheumatology, because Nevada was one of the states where they didn't have any pediatric rheumatologists.
Oh, wow.
And she was like, well, I keep seeing all these old people here in Florida, and what I really want to do is see young people and help them transition to adult care. So she was like, okay, let's move to Nevada. And, she's now the pediatric rheumatologist in Nevada, which is really going to help so many people.
Oh, definitely.
There are still, I think, 4 states that are all basically connected, which makes it even worse, that don't have pediatric rheumatologists, which is really hard.
Wow, that is really terrible. And there was actually, recently, there was a post on the Stanford Medicine blog about, they talked to a doctor who is trying to get better support for transitioning from pediatric to adult care for kids with chronic illnesses. Like the numbers of kids that are now surviving childhood cancer and also, living with other chronic illnesses, autoimmune conditions, that sort of thing. I forget what the statistic used to be. I think it was like 1 in 100, 1 in, whatever. Now it's actually 1 in 10 kids are either survivors of a major illness in their childhood or are chronically ill, and they're having a really hard time transitioning from, having everything more or less taken care of for them. Pediatric care is a completely different world than adult care, and it can have really disastrous consequences for some people.
Yeah,
which is really sad.
I've done some research on it, because the school I work at, they're actually starting to finally look at doing like a transitions clinic.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's Cleveland Clinic's just been doing it forever. It's fine. But nobody else. But, it's been studied overseas quite a bit, this idea of a transition clinic or helping other, kids with chronic conditions and in the transition to adulthood. It's been studied in England quite a bit. And it's really only starting here within the last 5-6 years. And Cleveland Clinic, I think, did a study with, I think it was Crohn's disease patients as children, and found was either Crohn's disease or cystic fibrosis, and I don't know why it's between those two, but that's what my head says.
Well, they both start with a C.
They do, right.
My
And they
brain does
both,
that. Like, if something starts with the same letter, sometimes that will come out of my mouth and it'll be the wrong thing. And I'm like, well, they're like next to each other in the filing system of my brain.
yeah, there you go. But, they were talking about how, the vibe in pediatric clinics is different. You get people who are happy to see you, who want to hear all about your life, to the adult clinic where people really don't care.
Right.
And then you go to like kids who don't have a very supportive transition team, whether that's physicians or parents or what have you, end up being far more likely to, not take their medicines the way they should be, to not doing follow-up appointments the way they should be, and even just dropping out of getting medical care in general, which can be so devastating for so many of us. Like,
yeah.
Think about like if you or I didn't have medical care anymore, like tomorrow, not because we just didn't have insurance or anything like that. We just decided, never mind. Like,
well, I actually did do that. Like when I was
did.
in college and shortly thereafter, I just was so kind of traumatized by my experience of being blown off so many times and that sort of thing that I just was like, maybe I'll just, never go to the doctor again and everything will be fine. And that did not work out very well. I highly don't recommend it.
Yeah, let's not do that.
Yeah. I mean, and it's so hard not to because this gets so daunting. And every once in a while, I'm like, what if I just didn't do this anymore?
Yeah.
I am at the point where like, that's not really an option.
I know, it's amazing.
I'm lucky that I don't have something that if I stop taking my medication, I'll die. I would be a mess, but I probably wouldn't actually die. Whereas, kids with sickle cell anemia or HIV, stuff like that, if they don't keep up with their medication regimens, it's not like they take a pill before bedtime. The medication regimens for a lot of complex chronic illnesses are really extensive. And so if they don't have the support to keep up with that stuff, it can be, you can die, which is just so sad and so unfortunate.
One is there's a lot of peer pressure too. Like as you transition to college, it's like, oh, I want to go out and party. Okay, well, I'm on methotrexate, and if I drink more than 2 drinks in a week, my liver's gonna start failing.
Right.
So I'm not gonna come binge drink with you. And then everybody's like, oh, she doesn't drink. Like, that can be really hard.
Yeah. For sure.
It's so emotionally damaging. I actually, when I was on methotrexate, I've been on it twice. First time I was on the pills, and that just was awful. Your body, when it digests the pills, you can get really bad stomach aches and intestinal issues. So that was just really too hard for me. And then I was on injections after that, and it didn't work out. But when I was on the pills, and my rheumatologist was like, okay, you can have 2 drinks a week. If you're going to have more than that, just skip your methotrexate. So then,
oof,
I know, it's bad.
That's a bad combo.
It is a bad combo. But so then what I would do is methotrexate night was always Friday night because I was working 2 jobs and going to grad school full time. And so I would like do something nice. I would like make myself some like nice mac and cheese. I would put on some jazzy music. I would get out some homework reading I had to do, and I would pour myself a nice glass of wine.
Nice.
And even though I probably shouldn't have, I would take my methotrexate with the wine.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, that's the one drink I'm going to allow myself this week. And it maybe wasn't the best choice, but it was a good self-love thing.
Yeah, because you were basically having date night with yourself.
Exactly. And getting stuff done at the same time.
And literally taking care of yourself by taking your medication.
And eating delicious mac and cheese.
There you go. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. This was fantastic.
You're welcome. Thank you for talking with me.
And thank you so much for listening to this episode of In Sickness and in Health. If you want to participate in the Chronic Sex Chat on Twitter, again, those will be Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern. Follow the hashtag Chronic Sex. You can find more from us at insicknesspod.com and on social media at insicknesspod. You can find Kirsten on Twitter at Kirsty Schultz and find her blog at notstandingstillsdisease.com. Please rate and review us on iTunes. It helps other people find the show. And don't forget to be excellent to yourselves and each other.